Hey guys, welcome back to Defining Truth, episode 41. I believe we have a very interesting guest today. Coming today happens to be live from Orlando, but you're going to want to watch this. Check it out. All right, guys, thanks for tuning in again. As always, you can watch us on YouTube if you want to see our lovely faces and that of our guests, or you can listen anywhere you get your podcast. That's Apple, Google, Amazon, Spotify, you name it, we're there. And as of late, we're also now on the Real Life Network, RLN. They have a really cool app, tons of great shows. Obviously, ours is on there. It's the best, of course. Check it out, Real Life Network. Today, lots going on in the news and the world, as always. But we have a very interesting guest today coming to you live from Orlando. His name is Chris Faulkner. He is a longtime political consultant amongst a lot of other things. Also somewhat of a Scottish Games/Viking competitor, I think I've seen. I'm going to let you get into it because instead of reading some long, boring bio, I'm just going to welcome Chris and he can tell us a little bit about himself. So, Chris, welcome to the show.
Hey, Shazai, good to see you and Brandon again. Always a pleasure talking to you guys about politics and current events, whatever's going on.
Always. Could you real quick, just for everyone listening out there who probably don't know who you are, can you give us just a short story on how you became, I guess we could use the term political consultant, and what drew you to this field, and why do you do what you do?
It's a great question. So I'm a military brat. I'm originally from Hawaii. My mom married my stepdad there, and we moved to Virginia later on when I was in middle school, and then kind of all around the world. And so my stepdad was a career Navy officer. And when people ask me, why are you conservative or why are you Republican? It's funny because, a lot of times people always have what I refer to as like an ideological answer, like, I believe in republicanism or conservatism because of this, or this. I'll be real honest. My vote was bought. When I was 10 years old, my stepdad came home from work and he had bought me a new bike. And I said, wow, I'm the oldest of four boys. Like, you don't get presents unless it's your birthday or Christmas. So what's going on? And he said, well, you need to remember today and how important it is. And I said, well, what happened today? He said, well, you need to know that Ronald Reagan gave the military a 12.1% pay increase. And so in our home, he always sits at the right hand of the father, and you should always respect Ronald Reagan. So at 10 years old, I was like, Ronald Reagan, free bike? Man, I'm a Republican.
Hey, capitalism, am I right?
Well, and I use that illustratively a lot of times too with candidates and campaigns as I work with them trying to figure out messaging and how to contrast their opponents, to remember that not everybody out there is driven by ideology. There's a lot of voters out there who are literally tuned into, what's in it for me radio.
Interesting.
They want to know what's in it for them. And I think we forget that too often in politics.
But you think we tend to overcomplicate it sometimes when for some folks, it's a lot simpler.
Absolutely.
Interesting.
I say this all the time, when it comes to campaigns, and I don't believe that voters are dumb. I believe the voters are busy, and whatever you got to say has got to fit through the small window of whatever time or bandwidth they have. But I don't think they're stupid, and I think they make pragmatic decisions, which are often based on self-interest or that of their loved ones and their family. And we should understand that, and respect it. And when it comes to the issues that are obviously driving most of the debate today, we talk about on the right, whether it's securing the border or whether it is cracking down on crime and making sure we have safe streets. These are all issues that are very personal for people. They don't feel safe.
Yeah. So how did you get into what you're doing currently?
Sure. So I, like a lot of Navy brats, wanted to piss my parents off, and I joined the Marine Corps out of high school. Had a great time. Got to run around the woods, paint my face, blow stuff up. And I managed to somehow hit that sweet spot right between like the first Gulf War and 9/11. So as I always like to joke, I never got shot at on purpose. But got out of the Marines and thought I was going to go to school. And, I was vaguely interested in politics or international affairs, and ran into a guy who was running for Congress. And they asked if I wanted to help with the campaign. I said, sure, what can I do? And they said, well, stop by the headquarters later today, and we'll get you hooked up with a job." So I stopped by the headquarters, and they had 25 lawn signs and 25 addresses. And
Mm.
so I put those in my 1985 Chevy S10 with the rust hole in the side, and I drove around. I put up yard signs, and came back the next day and said, "Hey, okay, what do you want me to do next?" And then I got on the phone and I started begging people to be volunteers for the campaign. Eventually got, I say promoted, but I guess I was a sucker. I just kept showing up and doing what they asked me to do.
Yeah.
I ended up on the phone, begging donors to give more money to the congressional campaign that I was
Yeah.
working for. And so, I would tell people, like, if you're interested in getting involved in the field, just remember, he who is faithful in little is faithful in much.
Mm.
Do crap jobs, do what you're asked to do what you can to help. Don't expect to be part of, the strategy or messaging discussion on day one.
Yeah.
And you keep showing up and you keep doing a good job and you do what you say you're going to do, good things happen.
And when was this, circa what time frame do you think, when you first got into stuff?
1996.
You can date yourself.
So,
It's all right.
yeah, I know. I do date myself. I'm 51. And yeah, it was 96. It was a different time. We obviously didn't have social media. We didn't really have, I mean, the internet was still very much a thing. I remember the first campaign where we actually had email addresses, and like the big upgrade that was.
Hey, well, you must be, your Botox must be going well because you look good for 51. Is that what you said? You're 51?
I'm 51,
This is,
yeah.
by the way, for anyone watching, the cleanest I've ever seen Chris Faulkner. So obviously, you got a haircut. You're fresh.
It's not like I'm a homeless person to walk around on walk.
Yeah, I don't mean filthy as in stench. I mean, like, you're looking like you're ready to run a race yourself.
No. I'm the victim of old age. As my hair continues to thin and fall out, I decided that having long hair around my shoulders just looks gross when you're old and scraggly. I didn't want to look like middle-aged Ben Franklin. So
At least
I decided to cut.
Ben Franklin. That's a great image. At least you have hair to grow. I do not. So I have an assortment of hats that I enjoy. As you can see, I'm wearing the reigning champions today, Detroit, for all my peeps. So I digress. What do you think the most challenging campaign you worked on to date? And just give us a short, maybe blip about that.
I mean, there's a lot of different ways you can take that question in terms of, quote unquote challenging. Sometimes the challenge is the environment. Maybe you have a really good person who's running in a really crappy district. Sometimes the challenge is the candidate themselves. It's not uncommon for me to encounter people that are running for office that have been very successful in their, what I would consider like their normal lives. They're teachers, they're attorneys, they're business owners, farmers, whatever it is. And they've been successful in it. And they feel like they have something to add, so they decide to run for office. And this is where the kind of breakdown comes in. People tend to treat it sometimes like a garage sale. They're just going to throw some stuff out there and see who buys it. And it just is always like troubling to me because, any halfway sane person, even if you're just taking like a family vacation, you're going to have a budget. You're going to have a plan. You're going to have like, hey, we're leaving on this day. We're going to get there on this day. We're going to spend this much on gas, this much on snacks or whatever. And so many campaigns lack that fundamental level of organization. And then they're surprised when the outcome is not winning because they didn't plan for winning. They just kind of planned for whatever because they didn't know what they were getting into. But to your question, like most challenging campaign or most challenging situation, I've been involved with a lot of campaigns from the presidential level all the way down to my wife running for township board back when we used to live in Indiana. And, challenging, like I said, it all kind of depends on the attitude of the candidate and the atmosphere and what's going on there. I would say that, challenging races are sometimes more fun, though, professionally for me than the slam dunks. I mean, nobody cares when, your favorite sports team blows out another team as much as it's satisfying when you get that buzzer beater, like last second win, or let's say you're, I don't know, Northern Illinois University, and you're going into Notre Dame after getting paid $1.4 million. And you decide to spank the number 5, team in the nation. Those are the kind of like signature wins that everybody like dreams about, I think, in politics, the kind of wins that nobody thought you were going to win. And, you somehow end up coming up on top. And there's usually it's never like one thing. You hear people say all the time, well, so-and-so won this race because they did X. It's never just kind of like one thing. It's a combination of environmental factors, what's going on up the ticket, down the ticket, national mood, local mood, quality of the candidate, which, I got to say, it's, if you're familiar with Ayn Rand and, Atlas Shrugged, one of the biggest challenges we face in politics today is the best and the brightest are not always showing up to run for office.
Yeah.
And
Almost never.
Well, yeah. And I've heard various people say this to a certain extent. Americans have exactly the kind of government they deserve. And you could debate the rights or the wrong of that, but having good people get involved is what helps me get up in the morning and keeps me motivated to keep doing what I'm doing.
And do you think that since, 96, for example, or before, like obviously climate has changed quite a bit. What's the biggest differences you see like today, like specifically this year in this sort of climate that we're in now versus in times past? And I guess what I'm really looking for is what can you tell people who are sort of lost in this conundrum of political confusion and blah, blah, blah? Just give us a kind of an update on like, what is it like to run a campaign now in this environment as we're so polarized?
So that's a good question. There's a couple different things that affect that. And I'll use the debate here. This past week is a good example. I'm a child of the 80s, Rocky IV Republican, as I always used to joke, which means like the Russians are the bad guys. And so when they're asking and grilling President Trump about does he want Ukraine to win, and he just keeps saying he wants the war to end, there is a fundamental part of me that is like uncomfortable with that answer. Intellectually, I understand what he's saying, but there's a guttural reaction to me that's like, whoa, Russians are the bad guys, man. Of course we want them to lose. I think the fundamental nature of American political parties and American political movements kind of shifts maybe once every 100 years or so. And we're actually living through pretty exciting times, depending on how you define exciting, in terms of the shift of populism and self-identified, what it means to be conservative or what it even means to be liberal has changed just dramatically in the last 20 years. But I think the best reference is if you go back, Teddy Roosevelt, you think like 100 years ago and what people thought it meant to be a Republican then, with everything from isolationism to involvement in foreign wars, versus what people thought it meant to be a Republican or a conservative in, the Bush years. I was fortunate enough to work for President Bush's reelection campaign in 2004, which I have some friends who worked for the Obama campaign. And I always like to remind them that when they won in 2008, the polling basically said 65% of Americans want change, and they had the change candidate, so they won. And I said, well, that's easy to do. But in 2004, 52% of Americans said they wanted a change in leadership, and we still reelected President Bush. So to me, maybe that's a little cynical, a little jaded, but that's more of a sign of we did something right there.
Yeah, interesting. We're going to get into the debate here probably next. So I'm just going to kick it off with that since you mentioned that particular question. Well, two things. One, you mentioned isolationism, which is something that Brandon and I talk about here on the show quite a bit. I believe there's been quite a resurgence of that. You see that in guys like Tucker and others who are drawing a crowd that's like, no, let's just take care of America. And if you know history, that is very reminiscent of, actually both just before World War I and then definitely World War II, where we waited and waited and waited and waited because there was this sense of Americans not wanting to get involved in another war, right? And there's two opposing perspectives. I'm very vocal about my perspective that getting involved or staying involved in geopolitical affairs globally is good for America. I'm not an advocate of isolationism or waiting for the enemy to come to my house. History has proven that's been disastrous. Just think of, had we jumped in a little earlier with what Hitler was doing versus waiting, the lives that could have been saved as we then subsequently invaded, North Africa and, obviously D-Day and trying to take back Europe. And I mean, it was just, we waited and waited and waited, and we did material support and we did things like that. So obviously there's a genius and wisdom in how your geopolitical strategy is applied. And that, of course, is the challenge of great statesmen. But I think that isolationism is dangerous because you have some very vocal, they tend to be populist type folks who are just kind of like, forget everybody else in the world. Let's just take care of Americans, and it's like, well, you are taking care of Americans when you're, say, forward thinking on counterterrorism, for example. So I see that that's polarized, even the conservative side right now, is you have people split all over the place. You have very differing opinions, and leading up to, okay, which is what I think, and I'm keen to hear your insight, but I think that's really what somebody was advising Trump behind that answer, because when he sort of refused to give a direct answer on that, it's really because of how the parties have aligned themselves. The Dems have set themselves up as, let's send billions to Ukraine and let's do it. And then you have all these conservatives who followed this sort of populist isolationist thing that they don't want to be involved. So he didn't really want to give a clear answer because he was playing that middle ground. That's the way that I kind of took it. What do you think about that perspective on his answer?
Well, two things. Number one, I am not a policy advisor to most of my clients. I mean, if people ask me my opinion or a question on policy, sure, my answer usually relates to how it works best for them in their campaign. I see myself more as kind of like an architect and a plumber than somebody who's, an interior designer, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And I would say, though, personally, as somebody who has kids that are 24, 22, and 21, and much like Lieutenant Dan and Forrest Gump, literally every generation of Faulkners has worn the uniform of our country since the American Revolution. And my sons will be the first generation of my family so far, to not be in the military, which is kind of troubling to me, just from a family tradition standpoint. But from a geopolitical standpoint, particularly after the withdrawal in Afghanistan, I don't know that I'm comfortable with my kids being pawns in a game that is being played really badly by people that are really not that smart.
Yeah.
And I would look back now and say, and obviously hindsight 2020, should we have invaded Iraq or Afghanistan? Personally, no, I don't think so. I think the way we handled both of those was bad, and bad being, of course, understatement of the year. I think that those things have created an atmosphere now where Americans are a lot more leery. Almost kind of like, you think post-Vietnam, Americans are very leery of getting involved somewhere where we feel like, why are we there? What's the point? Yeah. How does this connect to our actual security? And I agree with you. I've lived overseas for a lot of my life, actually. I've got to travel a fair amount and lived in Asia as well as Europe. And there is a good benefit to being involved and being engaged. And I think U.S. foreign policy, we always focus on the military aspect, but people forget how much money we give in foreign aid to a lot of countries as well, just economic foreign aid. We are involved, whether anybody wants to admit it or not, heavily all around the world. And in some places, we're making, this sounds a little callous, but we're making bets. We're making long-term bets as China tries to establish, the Silk Road again. Yeah. Their trading empire in the Pacific Rim. We can't allow that to just play out, because it's not going to, obviously play well for us. But I think that, that isolationism that you referred to is definitely driven by what we've observed in the last 20, 10, even 5 years in terms of American foreign policies feeling very discombobulated, lack of focus. And then obviously the withdrawal from Afghanistan was just a complete disaster.
Yeah, absolutely. So to summarize that, I think it's that we've basically completely lost trust in the government. I think that's kind of shared across the whole country.
Well, and I had a thought about this, and every now and then I think a thought is profound enough, I'll share it on social media. But can you imagine the scenario today if we actually tried to implement the draft, or selective service as it's known? If we actually sent letters to a bunch of 18 and 19-year-old Americans and said, hey, we need you to show up, at this MEP station for processing so you can enter the military, we would have riots in the streets that would make, the BLM stuff in 2020 look, tame by comparison.
Yeah, it's scary. Yeah.
Well, 42% of American high school students are literally physically ineligible for military service based on obesity or other problems. And,
Jeez.
The Army in particular, and I know these stats better than I know the other services, but well, if you want to count Space Force, all 6 services basically have missed their recruiting goals for the last 5 years.
Yeah.
And when I say miss their recruiting goals, people don't understand. The Army has to, and just the Army, not the other services, the Army has to recruit 15,000 warm bodies every calendar year to replace people that are finishing their 4-year, 6-year contracts.
Mm-hmm.
They have not hit, I believe, 12,000 for 4 years straight.
Jeez.
And we're spending, and I say we as taxpayers and as a country, just the Army, not the Navy or the Air Force or any of the other services, just the Army spends about $120 million a year on advertising. So you just do the quick math on that. We're basically spending like $9,000 to $10,000 per head. And at some point, let's just, let's skip the commercials and just give recruiters like checks, have them show up to high school graduations and be like, hey, who doesn't have plans? Who's interested? I got a check here.
Yeah, that's unbelievable. Those numbers. And really it's more of like DEI and Secret Service, like we saw after, the assassination attempt. It's like the left has decimated America's ideology. And this is where we get into stuff at Defining Truth, because we think that the culture war fuels a lot of the later, actions downstream. But the truth is, like, what do kids have to, be motivated for? We send our kids to school and we teach them that, they're all racist. America's the worst place ever. You look at the ads and even like you mentioned, all the money they spend on recruiting, but look at where they spend it. My gosh, it was like, what was it? What was that other commercial we watched the other day? It was like a cartoon about, a girl wanting to fulfill all her dreams. And that's what the military was for. It was to give her all that she wished for. And it's like, what is the messaging here? Right? Like, it's not sacrifice. It's not service to your country or others, or there's no honor anymore. So some of that is just kind of like, I look at it and I'm like, well, what did you think was going to happen? You've decimated American culture, and now nobody sees any reason to show up and join the military.
Well, and if you really want to be specific about it, because I've dived into the numbers on this, it's actually, and this is where it gets really uncomfortable with the Department of Defense and anybody who's actively in the military, is they don't want to usually discuss this, but the military acknowledged the fact 20, 30 years ago that it was disproportionately white and male. And so there was a tremendous push. And I don't know that I would say this is DEI as much as it was just kind of like this self-awareness and self-consciousness about the fact that the branches were too male and too white. And so they transferred a lot of their recruiting efforts into people of color and women. And so what you've seen with the recent recruiting numbers, all the services are actually getting a lot closer to their goals in terms of people of color and women. The problem is basically red state white dudes. And the 15,000 or so kids that used to join the Army every year, 56% of them were Anglo-Saxon Caucasian kids, usually from like red states and kind of flyover country places. That number has plummeted to like less than 42%, which basically gives you your entire gap right there. And it's more nefarious too than just the DEI and the politics. It's also just the basic quality of life. I mean, you remember this.
Yeah.
I mean, when I got married in 1994, I was an E4 and my wife and I were eligible for food stamps.
Yeah.
And that hasn't changed. 20% of the military, enlisted wise, still is eligible for public assistance. Like, that is criminal.
I think the year I deployed to combat, I made $24,000 a year.
Yeah.
It was pretty wild. Very interesting. It's Jordan Peterson has some really interesting insight on that regarding studies. I don't know if you know, there's that famous BBC interview where he's talking to the lady about equality of pay and whatnot. And Peterson's point of that, what people never look at when they look at, diversity or, gender gaps in services, they don't consider all the variables. They make it really binary when the truth is there's a lot of variables. Like, number one, did anyone stop to think and ask, does your little girl want to go be a grunt? Maybe women don't want to do that kind of job, that's a whole nother discussion. DEI is quite literally a Marxist tool. It's been used forever. You can trace it way, way, way back. There's no actual benefit other than political and power struggles. It doesn't benefit anyone else after that. So anyways, let's jump in real quick to the debate. We all watched it. I thought it was a mess. It was painful to finish watching it. I was just like, it was just cringy. I will say up front, it was pretty obvious that ABC, it was almost like I didn't know if Trump was debating the moderators or if he was talking to Kamala. It was hard to tell. If you look at David Muir, I think is how you say his name, he had a piece of paper in front of him And he was ready. I mean, several times Trump would say something and he would immediately look down and read an answer. Oh, well, we called the city manager in Springfield, Ohio, and that's not true. Anyways, back to Kamala. It was rough. In the days that followed, I watched a bunch of stuff. Even CNN was just slamming ABC for being totally biased. But I don't know that it shifted that much, and that's where I'll kick it over to you. So let's just, if you have, what's your general recap of the debate and the results and what it meant for the American public?
Obviously the viewing numbers were huge.
Yeah.
Tremendous amount of people. I want to say it was more than the Super Bowl in terms of actual viewership for the debate. Having said that, I think that the relative number of undecided, or if you want to call them swing voters, in this 2024 electorate is so incredibly small. I don't think the debate moved the needle for anybody. I think if you were a Kamala Harris supporter, you watched the debate and you were like, oh gosh, please let her not use the word salad, and, let her sound coherent and let her not get rattled by Trump. And I would say on most of those, and obviously my more partisan friends might disagree with me, but I'm just trying to look at this objectively as somebody who works in politics every day. She did what she needed to do. Mm-hmm. She gave coherent answers. No, I mean, were they factual based or was she fact checked? No, of course, none of that stuff actually happened. Now, if you're somebody who is, cheering for President Trump, you're looking at this and you're like, please don't rise to the, please don't take the bait, because she was clearly baiting him a number of times, and he had a hard time, I think, letting those go by, and he wanted to swing at him. Mm-hmm. But if you watch that debate, it wasn't like, anybody woke up and said, oh my gosh, Donald Trump can be abrupt and, or Donald Trump is, is mean or something like that. There's no surprises. People know who President Trump is. And I think most voters, whether they like him or not, are comfortable or getting more comfortable with their decision on who they're going to vote for. I don't think it moved the needle. My little email missive that I shoot out once a week to friends and donors and clients, I said that, hey, Kamala's going to continue to enjoy this bump post convention, but by the time we get to the debate, things are going to narrow out and it's going to be back to kind of square one, which is exactly where we're at today. And I'm wrong just as often as I'm right, so I was really thrilled to be right on that one. But I think this is going to be an incredibly close election. Nobody's going to be happy with the outcome.
No.
I still think, if I were, not that I do this, but if I were offshore betting, if I were, a betting man, I would still be buying Trump. Because at the end of the day, we talk about like the 7 states this really kind of comes down to. And at the end of the day, Trump is going to win Georgia. He's going to win North Carolina. He's going to win Arizona. He's probably going to win Nevada. He's going to probably lose Michigan, probably going to lose Wisconsin. But Pennsylvania is really all that matters.
Yeah.
At Kamala's peak, when she was like, riding high and raising hundreds of millions of dollars and all that kind of stuff last week, she was only +1 in Pennsylvania. So to me, that just screams that even when she was at her best, she was only up by 1. I think that is a sign of deep doo-doo for her and her campaign, because at the end of the day, like, Trump can lose North Carolina, but as long as he wins PA, he still wins. Trump can lose Nevada or Arizona or one of these others, or even Georgia, but as long as he wins Pennsylvania, he wins the race. Now, do I think he's going to win the popular vote? No. I think Trump's going to win the Electoral College. Democrats, as they have historically, will fare better in the popular vote. And there will be a lot of really, really angry people on the left, mostly the day after Election Day, when they're all Googling the same thing, which is, what is the Electoral College?
Yeah.
How did this happen? Because I think there's a lot of people who, are maybe newer to the political process or newer to the nuances of it, and they don't understand the Electoral College or the how or the why. And they're going to look at the results, and I guarantee the results will not be over, the day after Election Day. It's going to take a while. Be a lot of, I'm sure, finger pointing and some lawfare that's going to go on. Mm-hmm. But I still think President Trump's going to come out on top, and there's going to be a lot of angry people on the left who are going to take their discontent to the streets.
Yeah.
I don't say that apocalyptically or like I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah.
I'm just
just
watching,
factually.
people's behavior. Yeah, it's just kind of what you see out there.
Well, I think that will be further fueled by the fact that the left has taken an increasingly farther left stance in their worldview as they've departed from sort of the Christian Judeo backgrounds that America was based on and leaned more towards that where the popular vote is all that should matter. Hence, we see talk about why do we have an electoral college? Hence, we see them saying we need to restructure the Supreme Court because they're losing under the current method. And the truth is that a constitutional republic doesn't work like that. It doesn't work off mob rule. But because they've been so proactive in leaning in towards being friendly with the Chinese communists and pushing people to believe that populism is it's funny because they talk about populism in regard to Trump and stuff, but in truth, they're the ones that want the populist numbers because they don't like the electoral college. They want the power holds in your mega cities, right, to dictate everyone else's lives across the Midwest. The problem with that is as soon as we depart from a constitutional republic, i.e. the Constitution, and we're not going to go into like a founder's history lesson, but there was very specific intent in how our country was created, and a lot of that intent had to do with the condition of human beings. If you read the Constitutional Convention, which you can, and I encourage people to do, you hear the founders talking a lot about problems that men had and ambition and avarice and the love of money, the love of power. So they were very morally conscious when they crafted the Constitution, specifically because they're fleeing from all these problems in Europe and all these kingdoms and types of governments that had failed. And they said, all right, well, this time we're going to do something different. We're going to take, what we believe are natural God-given laws, and we're going to make a constitution that sort of fences in man's proclivities to kill each other. And the issue is when you strip that foundation away from under the tower falls. I mean, you're talking about a complete deconstruction of the American Republic to be some kind of new America minus God. And a lot of politicians won't talk about God, and they don't say things like that often, but underneath all the political talk, that's really what it comes down to is your moral worldview, because that's where these issues are centered. Things about pro-life issues and the Second Amendment. And, I wrote a book, Defining Truth. We went through these issues, 10 chapters, and that's what we did in the book. We tied a lot of these political issues, what people would say are political, we tied them back to the founders' original perspective on those issues. And it turns out they're all moral. Even the Second Amendment has less to do with the gun in your hand and more to do with what you believe the value of a life is and what you think the government's role is. Okay. I digress for just a minute. You mentioned the email that you send out. I want everybody to listen and to know that you send out these really cool emails with insights, some forecasting analysis and polling data stuff. I've enjoyed reading them. For anybody listening, if you're interested in this, and I'm okay to put this out, right, Chris? It's askfaulkner@gmail.com. Askfaulkner@gmail.com. I'll put that up on the screen for anybody watching here on YouTube. Faulkner, your last name is Faulkner, askfaulkner@gmail.com. Great emails. They're always timely. How often do you put them out? Like once a week or?
Once a week. Yeah, about once a week.
I think they're awesome. Okay, so
it's a synthesis of all the polling information and feedback that I get. Every day I'm talking to people that are running for office, people that are donating to candidates for office or different campaigns, candidates, journalists. And so I try and take all that mumbo jumbo and take a look at the polling information I have in front of me. And I try to put out just some kind of objective statements. And I send it to a fair amount of my friends on the left too. And, they'll say, oh, well, you're being partisan here or there. And then I'll have other friends on the right who will tell me that, why aren't you backing up President Trump? And I'm like, I'm not his cheerleader. My job is to it's like being a house inspector. It's my job to say whether or not things are right or whether things, based on what I see, if things are good or if things are bad. And so it's not a partisan newsletter where I'm trying to hype up whatever Republicans or conservatives are doing. It's me just trying to take an objective look at the political landscape as I see it and try and put a little bit of educated guess into what's coming next.
Yeah. And for example, in a recent email you put out, and I know you were just talking about Pennsylvania, you had pointed out that all data currently points to Trump winning the electoral, not the popular. And that's really going to center around Pennsylvania. And then the results basically is nobody will be happy with the election, which I think we kind of saw coming.
Yeah.
So great emails, askfaulkner@gmail.com. You guys sign up for that. How do you want them to do that? You want them to write you an email on there?
Just email me and say, you
Okay.
know, newsletter or weekly email, or, hey, I'd like to get emails from you.
Awesome.
I don't send them out every day. I don't ask people for money. I don't forward crap from campaigns. It's just once a week. I usually will take some polling that I get from other people, pull out what I think are some interesting nuggets, and kind of expound on those and why I think they're relevant.
Keep it secret, keep it safe, I believe Gandalf said. That's good for emails. So back to the debate real quick. So we get it, right? I don't think it shifted. So is it, I'm pretty sure yesterday Trump said that there will not be, or he's not planning on a third debate.
Correct.
I just think it's probably just a waste of time. I certainly would never do a debate with ABC again. I don't even know how that slipped by. Can you comment on that? Because I was curious, and I'm sure other people that listen to us are curious. How, like, is that on Trump's campaign, folks? Like, because I feel like if I was helping manage that campaign, like, that was a big, like, oops. Like, why did they allow Trump to go on ABC when it was like, you know, the lady from ABC is Kamala's sorority sister. David Muir is like far left, super biased. I mean, it was just a disaster. It was like he was debating three people. Did the campaign not see that coming? Is that not on them? Like, he didn't seem prepped for that ambush.
Well, I would claim no extraordinary insight into what Susie Wiles or Chris Lasavita or anyone else that was involved, what their thought process was behind the debate. I haven't asked any of them that question specifically, but I would start with the context that always remember, nobody tells Donald Trump what he is or what he isn't doing. Donald Trump will let you know what he's planning on doing, and then he's going to do it. And I'm not saying he doesn't listen to advice, but just based on observation and, you know, information that is readily available to anybody out there, Donald Trump is clearly not someone who is going to, you know, say, I'm afraid to do anything. And I think if I had to, like, try and prognosticate, you know, the reason why they agreed to, you know, ABC being the host, they were eager to get Kamala on stage because of her kind of lack of substance, or perceived lack of substance, when it came to policy. And so maybe that's why they were more eager to agree to a debate hosted by ABC instead of maybe somebody like, I don't know. I mean, you could say that if maybe Fox News was the moderator, it would have been better.
I mean, I think CNN would have done a better job, to be honest. That was just, It was horrifying.
It was. And I guess there's a part of me too that I have to remind myself that not everybody, you know, is as cynical and jaded about politics as I guess. I just expect the media to be unfair to people on the right. And so it's less shocking to me when I see it happen. But it doesn't mean that you shouldn't be outraged by it, because it absolutely is.
So I guess my question is there no pre-coordination or planning? Because it appeared pretty obvious during the debate, like we've pointed out, that David Muir had answers ready for Trump written on a piece of paper in front of him. Clearly, Kamala knew that. So, like, how come the Trump team didn't have answers? Like, one clear, obvious one is the whole pet eating thing, right? Which the internet has taken by storm. Some of the most hilarious memes you've ever seen in your life. Cats for Trump and all this stuff. But that's really not that difficult of a question. They fact checked him on that like it was solid, while literally simultaneously, while David Muir is saying, well, we called the city manager in Springfield and that's not happening. Literally on my phone, I'm getting notices like, there were migrants eating geese in the park there. 2 El Salvadorians were arrested for shooting a bald eagle with intent to barbecue it. There's a video out of Springfield. A lady's in her front yard, and the neighbor, who's a black lady, so she's out in front talking about her neighbor. The witness is a black lady, and she goes, I was watching her eat the cat on my yard. That's just a few off the top of my head, right?
Right.
Like, that I could spout out just from perusing Instagram this week. So I don't understand. And there were several other moments where Trump obviously made claims based on things that he's seen with his own eyes, and a lot of other people have. Why were they not ready for that? Like, and obviously David Muir and Kamala were, and they shut it down without really, I mean, what is that? I called the city manager and he says it's not true. I mean, it's this Orwellian double talk where they want you to not believe what you're seeing with your own eyes, right? Like, pay no attention. The economy's wonderful. So just from a consultant perspective, what role does the campaign play in prepping him, or were they just completely in the dark about those questions? Or I guess, what's your opinion on that?
My guess is they probably had a general idea of what was going to be discussed, they being Trump's campaign. But they have no control. As soon as the cameras are on, I mean, and they're in a secluded studio, it's not like, and I've seen all the same videos as everyone else about Kamala Harris and the pearl earrings and stuff. And I don't know. I'm not an expert
I
in,
saw those too.
sound devices or whatever. Maybe that's the case. She was clearly very rehearsed. And if you remember the first like 15 minutes of the debate, she was cranking out some like pre-canned answers that had nothing to do with the question the mirror was actually asking.
Yeah.
She wanted to say opportunity economy so freaking bad that like, opportunity economy. And you could tell like she was super nervous.
Mm-hmm.
She settled. But in terms of, I guess, I don't know. I don't hold, and maybe it's because I'm biased because I am somebody who works in the political spectrum. I'm not as, I guess, concerned about Trump's campaign, prepping him or not prepping him. Because again, if I'm a 70-something-year-old billionaire or really, 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 really wealthy, and 8 years ago, everybody told me there's no way in hell that I would be the Republican nominee for president. And then I did it. And then everybody in the world, including Jack like me, said there's no way that guy's going to get elected president. And I did it. Man, it'd be really tough to give me advice after that. Hey, Chris, today the sky is blue. No, it's not. It's red. Because that's what I think. And so I guess what I'm trying to kind of give people an example of, it's not that President Trump doesn't care about advice. I've never given him, firsthand advice before, so I'm just going off what I observed. He's somebody who knows what he's about, love it or hate it. He knows what he thinks on things. And so to the degree that you can prep him or even try to quote unquote, like protect him from hostile media, I don't think there's a lot you can do there.
Yeah.
Obviously Kamala rolls around in a plastic bubble and nobody asks her any questions and everybody seems to be okay with that. Meanwhile, JD Vance and, Donald Trump are doing 2 and 3 interviews a day. So, but again, I guess you can't be surprised when all this, the media is, not on our team.
Yeah.
They're not.
I guess I just wish that somebody would have helped, like, I guess some backup would have been nice, because in literally within minutes of all of these, fact checks that the debaters threw at Trump, the internet was ablaze with, correcting them. Basically, she lied about all kinds of stuff. The other issue was the born alive issue and abortion. They slammed that. You saw that the lady, I'm forgetting her name, the moderator, that really irritated her. She like stopped and looked at him, Mr. President, that's not true. When the truth is, Family Research Council in DC posted, I think during the debate, there's no federal crime statute against taking the lives of born alive infants. So what they're doing is it's semantics, right? Currently right now, if you're born alive, you can be left to die in 15 states in the US, including the District of Columbia. So what they're saying is, this is how stupid they think the American people are. In 15 states, you can have the baby and just leave it on the table until it dies. They just let it gasp out. That's legal. And there's no crime. There's no federal statute that prevents that from happening. But what they say is, we're no longer cutting the baby into pieces because it's outside the womb now. You know what I mean? It's just like, I don't know if people are just dumb to believe that line, but that, for example, would have been a great thing to respond to, but instead lies are difficult because it catches you so off guard, like you said, blue sky, red sky. If the sky is blue and a moderator goes, Mr. President, that's not true. The sky is red. Anyways, moving on, let's go to Kamala. It's like, how do you even deal with that sort of, like we said, Orwellian double talk? You really have to be prepared, to not get caught in those gotcha moments. Right.
So I think it's easy to, criticize, for someone like me, it's easy to criticize or sound like I'm criticizing President Trump for, doing or saying whatever it is that he wants to do. However, I think that's also part of his genius and part of his appeal. Yeah. He says things in such a conversational and relatable way that people are like, oh, that sounds reasonable, and then, when you have, Kamala Harris trying to tell us that the economy's fine and that crime is down, it's just like, what bubble of universe are you living in? Like no one else believes that. And this is one of the big indicators I said in my last email missive is the right track, wrong track question, which is for people, when we have polling surveys, we always like to ask, do you believe the country or your state or district or whatever you're running for, do you believe that we are on the right track or that we've gotten off on the wrong track? It's just kind of a general kind of how do you see the world type thing. And when you're an incumbent and 75% of people say we're off on the wrong track, like that's usually like the death sentence. Like there's no way you're coming back from that. And again, going back to Barack Obama 2008, he ran a really great campaign against Hillary, but for the general election against McCain, all he had to do was kind of sit on a lead, just
Right.
like, don't screw this up. Everybody wants change. I'm the change guy, so I'm going to win. And so that's where I think that it doesn't matter how much money Kamala raises. She's going to have all the money she needs. This whole narrative about Republicans being the party of the rich is just such a freaking joke.
Yeah.
Every single one of our committees, every single one of our super PACs, every single one of our campaigns gets outraised regularly by the Democrats. And that's just the money we can track, because there's a lot of money out there that we're not tracking. And, you saw Mark Zuckerberg's announcement, like, oops, I gave $400 million. I didn't realize it was helping Democrats turn out their vote.
Not to mention the in-kind type donations like big tech censoring information. That's huge. Huge. We I don't know if you're tracking that study, but last cycle there was I forget, Brandon, who put that out about Gmail, where it was like 98% of Republican messaging went to spam. And I mean, that's huge. That's actual. You could go to court and prove how, that's you could monetize that and be like, you guys literally stole by not allowing people access to truth or information. Well, this is my opinion. I know some people disagree, but I believe that they are violating our First Amendment rights. And if you the whole like, well, we're a private company. It's like, okay, well, we dealt with that with television and radio a long time ago, right? Where 98%, 99% of people get their news from places like Instagram or TikTok, which has extremely high viewership, then I think Congress needs to do something about the free flow of information. Because if first of all, they censor you. We've all seen it on big tech, right? You get censored, you get blocked. I've had videos blocked by Instagram, and they've threatened to demonetize me for putting like a video of Biden saying something where it's his own self. It's him saying it. Like he's just there speaking, and they don't like it. And it's not even always individuals. There's algorithms. They pick up on stuff they don't like. So someone's programming. Someone's behind that, right? So now, recently, you mentioned Zuckerberg. He's out like saying, yeah, I shouldn't have done it, right? I don't know what he's having, a midlife crisis or what, but now all of a sudden he's like, yeah, I regret working with the FBI. I'm like, this is like borderline treasonous stuff. I think this is why, on a side note, people are just utterly panicking about the return of Donald Trump, because they got away with like Banana Republic type behavior over the last 4 years, where they've weaponized the Department of Justice. They've weaponized, I guess, bureaucracies in general, completely weaponized in their favor. And they've geared them towards elections, this is where I'm, very concerned as an American, because, going after your political opponents is one thing, but when you weaponize things in the government and outside, like big tech, to alter the outcome of an election by either not letting people see the truth, by concealing or whatever, you're acting like a totalitarian regime. That's very dangerous to do, right? A couple episodes ago, we did a special on the Hunter Biden laptop story. And as our listeners know, I spent a long time in the government. A big chunk of that, I worked investigations. I was a federal investigator and a special agent with the Department of State. And I've written federal indictments before and spent a lot of time investigating organized crime groups and putting together conspiracy stuff. And knowing how that works, I sat down and I read all the publicly available information, at least on the Hunter laptop Biden story. I'm telling you right now, that is a classic in the book treason/espionage case. Anybody, and I've talked to a lot of people, still active in that world that are buddies of mine, and everybody's like, yeah, dude, we could write a warrant for that. There's probable cause that the Bidens are in bed with the Chinese communists. It's like a blind person could see that. And that's just one example, right? So then you have big tech coming in, and it's hard for people to trust, going back to your point, like nobody trusts anything the government does anymore.
Yeah. And and I probably am, I'm not supposed to say things like this, but you know me well enough. I don't really give well, I'll try and not use too many swear words, but I, I'm definitely in the minority on this. You see this every election day, right? And people will post on Instagram and Facebook and TikTok, oh, don't forget today's election day, get out there and vote. I post the same thing every election day. And I just say, here, dear friends and family, today's election day. If that is a surprise to you, then stay home. Do the rest of us a favor. Because ballots are like guns, right?
Yeah.
If you don't know how to use it or who you want to aim it at, just keep it in the holster. Do the rest of us a favor. And I know that's not a popular narrative because it sounds like, oh, I get it. I'm the big white Protestant straight guy, and I'm not supposed to talk about these kind of things.
You're the worst.
I am. I've seen the memes, but in all seriousness, if you go door to door enough, you'll talk to enough Americans where you're like, you know what? There's probably a reason why you don't have a driver's license. There may be a reason why you are not allowed to go near a school, but somehow we're okay with everybody voting. And, the founding fathers didn't see it that way. I mean, you want to go back to, Roman or, even Greek democracy, the Athenian model. It was never one man, one vote. And it was for a good reason. And by the same token, you have a Democratic Party that is talking to us constantly about how everyone should get out and vote and everyone should be able to vote, one man, one vote. In the same breath, they'll tell you that we cannot allow all these falsehoods to be online, that we have to censor this information because we can't allow, people just to make their own judgment, God forbid, on the information they're able to find, online or offline.
Well, that's not what they really mean by that. What that's really about is that goes to the border and the mass migration that they've pushed. They're counting on those votes. I mean, I think that's pretty obvious. I was at an event a couple weeks ago in Newport with Congressman Heiss, former Congressman Heiss from Georgia, who's now on the board there for FRC in DC. And he's talking about Georgia has, they've just discovered something 50,000+ illegal aliens who are actually registered to vote. That's Georgia. Can you imagine California? So, people need to remember that when they go on, you hear them on the news talking about showing an ID is racist. I mean, this is really about don't get in the way of our plan here to increase our voter demographic substantially, right? And we know that because even after, I'm sure you've seen some of the studies where in some places throughout the country, there was 100,000 more people than there were registered voters that voted. So how can, and I don't know if we want to get into this too much, but there's a lot of doubt in the process of voting, period. And how do you think that's going to play in? Is there any discussion about trust in voting process or specifically the illegal immigrant input? What's your sense or opinion on that?
So I've been really fortunate. I've worked in elections in several different countries other than the United States. And you know what they do in those other countries? They have paper ballots, one ballot per voter. And then in some of those countries, you got to dip your finger in that indelible purple ink to show that you voted.
We did that in Iraq.
And somehow we think as Americans, we're so much better, right? It's in a way, it's really condescending. We are so much more evolved in our democracy that we don't have to do those petty things. We want to make voting as easy as humanly possible for anybody and everybody, to do. And the fact that anybody's even pushing back on the idea of showing some sort of valid ID to vote is deeply troubling because, like you said, there's this underlying premise that, oh, well, we want to get everybody in, whether they're American citizens or not. Now, I would take that, though, and I'd like, maybe to think about this a little more glass half full than glass half empty. I've met a lot of immigrants. I've lived overseas. I can't say that I've been an immigrant myself, but I've definitely been a minority in some of the schools I've lived in and things like that. And I would tell you that I have a lot of faith in, believe it or not, in immigrants. I have a lot of faith in the kind of people that are risking their lives to come to America. Now, I'm not defending the cartels and the human trafficking, the fentanyl, and all the rest of that crap that goes on, and the replacement. And you see all these people. A good example. I mean, down in Jacumba Springs, just south of you guys, the Border Patrol agents will tell you they're not intercepting anybody that's speaking Spanish anymore. No. The vast majority of people are speaking languages other than Spanish. Mm-hmm. And I think for every voter that, people on the hardcore left who've ideologically convinced themselves that if we let in, anybody and everybody that they'll vote Democrat, I think that is going to come eventually around to bite them in the ass. It may take a couple election cycles to happen, but for every voter they think they're enrolling, who's an illegal immigrant, they're losing a native-born American. And when I say native-born American, that's not some sort of like racial context for white people. I'm talking about Mexican Americans, Black Americans, Asian Americans, people who are born in this country who, whether they're Caucasian or not, they see their way of life that they've worked very hard to establish being undermined. And, in California, unfortunately, always the extreme case. Hey, let's offer, guaranteed home mortgages to illegal immigrants, free tuition, and like a lot of stuff that like normal Americans aren't even eligible for. It's so like blows your mind that
I know.
I think that is going to come back, and that's really going to hurt Democrats in the long run.
Well, and who it mostly hurts, and you see this playing out through crime and through benefits, like you mentioned, are the minority communities. I mean, I thought one of the best speeches at the RNC was the mom, Madeleine Brame. Her son was stabbed on the streets of New York after surviving a combat tour in Afghanistan. And she went up at the RNC and just blasted the Democrats. She said, Democrats have stabbed poor minorities in the back. And that's true. You see that speaking of Springfield, Ohio, Springfield is a disaster right now. And you could debate back and forth whether people are eating cats or not. But other than that, it's a disaster from benefit perspective. I watched a lady that went before the city council and talked about like 5 or 6 Haitian dudes. They're all military age males who basically just live on the front of their property now. Her and her husband, they've lived there for 40 years. They're getting into screaming matches and fighting and throwing trash on their house. The city can't do anything. The police can't do anything. I agree with you. I didn't even grow up in this country. I grew up in Mexico and South America. And it's not an issue of legal immigration. As just to clarify, we're all pro legal immigration. In fact, we all came from immigrants. Well, a lot of us did. Sure. The issue is you hit it right on the head when you said that a lot of native-born Americans have worked really hard for our, quote, way of life. That's the culture point that matters, because America was based on these constitutional republic principles, these Christian Judaic values, and that kind of makes our society. And as we further depart from that, when we're welcoming people in, if there's not okay, welcome here, now do our way of life, right? Where we respect the institutions of law and we have those sort of first world institutions that make us who we are. Then all you're doing is welcoming in the same type of culture and behavior. I'm not even blaming the people coming, because if they don't know any better, they don't know any better. But if you're bringing them in and then they're doing the same things we're doing in like Mali or West Africa or Nigeria, or pick on Eurasia for a second, you have a ton of Eurasian folks like Slavs and Ukrainians and people from everywhere, like you said, right? If we're importing the same type of behavior and culture that has decimated those countries, then why do we expect there to be any different change here in the United States? So, my family, both sides of my family were both immigrants. And I remember my grandma's 99 years old. She was born in the 1920s. I remember her telling me a story about her mother, who was German, spoke fluent German, used to make big vats of sauerkraut in the basement back in Pennsylvania where they lived. She refused to let the girls, my grandmother and her sisters, speak German. They were very, very adamant about we love this country. We were welcomed in when they immigrated here. They wanted them to jump on the American dream bandwagon, I guess, right? They're all fleeing from somewhere else. Same with my Irish side of the family, right? They were fleeing from violence and famine and Bloody Sunday and all of these destitute issues where societies had crumbled and fallen. America was something different, where people went to church on Sunday. They played baseball. We had apple pie. We believed in things that were very different than the rest of the world. So, and we've lost that because you have a whole side of the political spectrum that wants to tell you that all of those things are evil and racist and bad. And so you have this generation growing up that's like, well, yeah, I guess there really isn't a difference between us and, like the communists in China, or like, the problem with just south of us in Mexico, for example, lots of problems, by the way, if you've been paying attention with cartels. Okay. It's like 10 times worse than Pablo Escobar was back in the heyday.
I don't even know why we engage with the Mexican government. We should just we should open an embassy with the Sinaloa cartel so we can actually talk to who's in charge.
It's really, really bad. And so it's just very ignorant, I guess is what I'm saying, for people to think that like the only difference there is monetary. It's like, oh, well, if you just give the Zetas cartels, who are primarily running all the human trafficking. If they just had more money or the climate was better, then they'd be just like, us. You see that stupidity played out in the geopolitical realm because we tried to go do that in the Middle East too, where you see like the Obama-Hillary administration tried to push this sort of Americanism in like, or Libya, for example, right? Where you have Benghazi and that whole story. It doesn't work. So we welcome everyone, I think, to the point, obviously, but we welcome, and it's like, okay, do things the way that we've seen have been successful and fruitful.
So, and Josiah, you know what this is like because you've traveled and you've lived overseas. I lived in Seoul, South Korea for 3.5 years. I lived in Europe for 2 years. I've traveled to a lot of Muslim countries, places where people have very different backgrounds religiously, ethnically than me. And one of my first inclinations is always, how do I be respectful to the existing culture?
Right.
Now, in Korea, that may be something as simple as learning a couple of words or understanding which hand gestures are insulting and which ones are okay to use, or, just how you conduct yourself. In a Muslim country, I got to visit some incredible mosques. And even though my wife and I are not Muslim, she wore the wrap around her shoulders to be respectful of their faith and their culture. And for some reason, it's like we don't ask anyone to show even a modicum of respect for our culture. And, what is our culture? Well, that's a whole can of worms we can really get into. But I can tell you that a better way to think about it in a simplified aspect is whatever it is that we have, people want. They're risking their lives every day to get here. So instead of denigrating our culture and denigrating all the mistakes, and the United States has made plenty of mistakes in our historical past, you can point to all of those things, but you can't constantly point to the mistakes without acknowledging all the incredible benefits. Right. You can't, point to the ways in which we've made horrible mistakes with slavery, American Indians, Japanese internment. You can point to all these horrible things that have happened in the history of the United States, but you can't ignore all the incredible things and the reason why we're still the number one destination. And that's what always troubles me when people are talking about how America is, such a horrible country. I'm like, then why do millions of people risk their lives every day to get here? If it's so bad, if it's as bad as you say it is. And part of that's just, I think, it's almost we're guilty of our own hubris, right? Americans don't travel. And for a lot of Americans, going to, Epcot at Disney World might be the most international experience they ever have. Yeah. And so when they think about poverty, when they think about the third world, they may think about things they see in downtown Los Angeles or New York or something like that. No, go to Indonesia. Yeah. Go to Iraq. Go to some of these places where people don't have clean drinking water. And yes, I know there are communities in the United States that don't have, some of these basic necessities. You can always point to those outliers. But the vast majority of the United States, people have access.
Absolutely. The poorest of the poor in America are better off than 90% of the rest of the world.
And I'm not saying we should ignore the poor, justifying those things, but to me, just the overall, the fact that we don't expect people to respect our nation and our culture, however you want to define that culture, the fact that we just want people to be able to, hey, pick up with your value system and beliefs, even if it's completely antithetical to American beliefs, and you can plant that in Houston and start, having Sharia law or do whatever you want. No, that's not how this works.
This is why, by the way, it's a lot more methodical than people realize. And I think we should point that out real quick because it happens in steps. The left has purposefully done this. It's intentional. And when I say this, I mean, when you're saying there's no respect for culture, let's look at that chain though of progression. So when you have someone, let's just because it's the closest country, I know there's people coming from all over, but let's say someone comes from Mexico, right? The initial sort of welcome to America message is we don't care about the rule of law, right? So right off, we start on a bad step because you can't really trust rule of law in Mexico, right? People don't trust the police. They don't trust the bureaucracies. They don't trust the government. So instead of saying, hey, we do want to bring in you're tired and you're weary and you're sick, but let's do it the right way because we have laws. No, the first thing we say is there's no law. Anybody can come in. We won't vet you. We won't check you. It's mass illegal immigration. And then if anybody says otherwise, they're a racist. So step 2 is the Democrats specifically target these communities of immigrants, very specifically and intentionally. They put a lot of money toward it. I'll give you one story. I was working as a police officer in Oceanside, long time ago now. And I was invited to a community policing event in a neighborhood that's about 99.9% Hispanic. And this event was hosted by the ACLU. And they wanted police there for something. I forget what it was. But what they didn't realize is that I was my first language was Spanish. I grew up, as I mentioned, in Mexico. I was fluent in Spanish. So I go in and they open this presentation, and it's a picture of a police officer in a blue uniform. And the message is all in Spanish. So I don't think the other people knew what it was. But the room is packed full of people who've just illegally entered, and they're finding houses and families there in this neighborhood. And the whole PowerPoint presentation, slide number 1, the police are racist. Do not trust them. And you can imagine where it went from there. And I'm watching this like, what in the world? So right away, you have illegal immigration, step 1, don't respect rule of law in this country. Step 2 was, we're going to immediately indoctrinate them with this anti-American leftist mentality that says, don't trust the government, don't trust the bureaucracy. Oh, and guess what the third point was? You have to vote Democrat. And right then and there, they're signing people up. They're making sure they can get IDs. Right? Because if you have a California driver's license, which you don't need to be a citizen, you can go and vote because half the polling sites in California don't even check you. I know that for a fact. I've experienced it. So you have this very intentional process of manipulating people and pushing this far left agenda that, it's worth mentioning, has been going on for years. And this is, as you know, you've heard, I'm very open about my dissatisfaction with the establishment politics within the GOP. I just feel like while so many are dismissing the culture war as a waste of time, etc., we're just being played for fools because the left has been at this for decades and they reap what they sow. I mean, and they're out there. They're out there in the communities, signing people up, telling them that everyone's racist if they're Republican. I mean, the messaging is constant and it's heavy. All the way up to just recently, you have all these videos of independent journalists going down to the border. You mentioned, Jacumba down in San Diego County, where you have all these porta-johns. There's like 100 of them lined up in the desert for everybody crossing. And in the porta-johns, you have voter registration forms in Spanish. And then, but Kamala will go up on a debate and be like, you're a liar. What a crazy person you are for thinking this. This is what part of what motivated me when I tried to run for Congress that one time. A lot of it was that I was frustrated because no one was speaking the truth. I didn't hear it on either side. I was frustrated that I didn't hear the Republicans addressing these issues enough. Kind of like I'm saying, I don't feel like there was enough answers to the David Muir questions during the debate. It's like this sort of refusal to engage. I think what happens is at some point, Republicans need to realize that we're at war. We've been in a Cold War for a long time, and the gloves need to come off. And I hear this constantly. Brennan and I talk about, the constant campaign messaging is let's be careful. Let's not talk about abortion. There's this magical, mysterious middle undecided group. It's not working. It's not working. We lose constantly, and our enemy is very devoted and zealous at what they do. And America deserves better. Like, somebody has to talk about this stuff. There's a few up in Congress, but it's really bad. As you know, I think we've talked about it before. One of my first assignments, I was in the LA field office as when I was a federal agent. I was working organized crime cases. I worked Russian organized crime and Armenian stuff and some other stuff. I had a case directly involving the border. It had nothing to do with Mexico or any Latin American country. It was all Eurasians, Armenians, Ukrainians, Poles, and Russians. And, that year, I think there was about 40,000 Eurasians that were coming across claiming asylum. And you know what I was doing there? Because I'm not a Border Patrol guy. And everyone was taking advantage of it. We were looking at like coming across the border, not government people showing up and claiming asylum, and mixed in there was IRGC folks as well. Some of the stuff I probably shouldn't talk about online, but it's heavy, it's constant, and all of our, I would say, global opponents are aware of how stupid we are, and they're just sitting back watching us rip each other apart. The left has fully adopted our enemy's ideology. The messaging, everything. You can go back to the Soviet time, and it basically now it's just regurgitating that message of America's bad, capitalism's bad, you're racist, yada, yada, yada. What they're failing to connect, and I would say what the Republicans are failing to connect, is there's a reason why our enemies constantly hit these points over and over again. There's a purpose to it. There's an end goal, right? When they talk about DEI and things like that, if that's coming from a leftist background, you always got to ask yourself, what's the end goal here, right? There's a power goal. Politics is just the struggle for power, and that is their purpose, right? You flood the system. It's the Brandon. What's the expose we did on the couple from Columbia University?
Yeah, I can't remember.
Cloward Piven.
Yeah, Pivens.
Right? Are you familiar with Cloward Piven? They were professors, devout communists back in the 60s. Their whole thing was this progressive Marxist ideology called the Cloward Piven strategy, which was basically like purposefully overload the system so that it's destroyed. And then you need big government to come in and fix it. And I think you see that playing out all over the place, except for it's not just one place. They're doing it with the border. They're doing it with the economy. That's hence all the double talk. They are literally destroying the country and at the same time telling you need me to fix it, right? I mean, that's what I heard from the debate from Kamala. I'll digress. I'm running out of breath, but I'm getting angry.
No, it's absolutely unfortunately I think one of the many things that's missing in American political discourse and substance of any kind of discussion these days is the ability to say, you know what, I might have been wrong about the way I felt about something a year ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago. And I'll give you an example. I was always, for a long time, very much, I didn't like the build the wall language because to me it wasn't so much about race as much as it was like, I appreciate the fact that so many immigrants that come to this country, or at least my 1990s, early 2000s version of immigration was people are coming to this country because they want a better life. Most of them. There's always going to be bad actors, and we should absolutely, make sure those people don't get into our country. And if we catch them, we should absolutely ship them back. But I feel like it's okay to say it. Hey, I was wrong. What we have now is just complete lawlessness. We have taken what should have been a regulated and candidly a process that can make America stronger and better. And we've turned it into this giant, instead of like taking our vitamins, by getting quote unquote the good immigrants or people that want to be Americans, we're just like literally drinking raw sewage now. It's like whatever they want to send, whoever wants to show up. It's deeply troubling to me when you look at, because this is happening, I know, in Orange County and it's happening in San Diego County, where you have people that are taking boats, 12 and 15, 20 grand they're paying the cartels to, a boat's going to roll up, somewhere on one of the beaches and a dude's going to jump out and get in a car and drive away. And you have to ask yourself, if it's so easy to get across the border, what kind of bad actor are you, or what kind of person are you that you're paying extra to do? Like, you are clearly somebody who's on a terrorist watch list or somebody who's a nefarious person. Like, that's how easy access to the U.S. has gotten, to the point where literally people are paying extra to figure out some creative ways to get in. And like, that is just long-term, as you've said, in so many ways and in shapes and forms. It's just not healthy for our country.
No, and unfortunately, the left aids and abets them, because that's why the epicenter of even what I mentioned before in some of those more international focused cases I was working they're coming to places like New York and California, because they know that they can pull it off here, right? They're not going to Boise. They're not going to Franklin, Tennessee. I mean, yeah, some stuff ends up there, but when you talk about initial impact, let's say I'm an intel operative, okay? If I'm an IO, okay? And I'm coming from Russia, and I was in the Russian military, I worked intelligence, and then all of a sudden I was an electrician. It's like magic. And I board a flight, and I end up in the capital city, Mexico, El DF. And then I disappear. And maybe a guy like me was watching you. And you went from Russian military intelligence to electrician to disappearing in Mexico. And then you show up in downtown LA. Magically. You have a social security card number and a driver's license. Oh, and you are Armenian now. You're not Russian. And imagine trying to work this situation where the state of California is telling you, if you focusing on this, you're a racist. Oh, and by the way, we're going to take taxpayer money and we're going to fund everyone, right? Because they blanket it. And our issue is like, this is the problem with letting children run the government. It's like, out of 100 people, 99 of them are just normal immigrants that just want to get here and have a better life. But if one of them is a foreign intelligence operative or a terrorist, then you have a problem with your system, right? Like, And I guess that's where you have this departure where it's like they just don't care about Americans, because the benefit of letting 100 people in and then manipulating them over to your political side is just worth it to them. I mean, you had 8 ISIS-connected members that crossed the border through San Diego and pilfered out into the United States just 2 months ago. And so that alone is enough. I don't care if 1 million people cross that are okay. If you've disregarded rule of law, you have no system of vetting, you have no responsible way of looking at your charge when people elect you and put you in these positions. At some point, and this is where it becomes like, it's like treason or it's just gross negligence, right? This was the whole debate with the attempt assassination against Trump. Everybody was like, are you like a bad person or are you just completely ignorant and incompetent? And where does that line cross where like your incompetence should be held accountable? You know, this is same question we would have for Mayorkas, who is well informed more than any of us are. And if I can observe these things about bad actors coming across the border, then why is the head of Department of Homeland Security not able to do it? And at what point do we hold them accountable? I think that, speaking of, you know, the election again, if Trump gets back into office, a lot of these things will be dealt with. And I think that people are afraid of that. I think that is highly, highly motivating them to stop him from taking office.
Well, and one thing that I can say over 30 years of working in American politics and elections, I can say with absolute surety is the one thing that, you know, if you want to say the establishment, whether it's Republican, Democrat, institutional, bureaucratic, or whatever, the one thing everybody fears is change, right? And that's the one thing that, you know, love him or hate him, that Donald Trump always brings to the discussion is there is kind of like a wild card factor. You don't necessarily know what he's going to say or what he's going to do. And so that variable of randomness is extremely disconcerting to the people that are, you know, and I don't want to sound overly conspiratory, but I mean, at the end of the day, when you have, the top 100 business leaders have endorsed Kamala Harris, including Dick Cheney and some other people. It's like, I want to turn to my friends on the left and be like, so this is your party. Like, this is your jam. You're basically saying that you're being backed by all of these business leaders who are controlling our economy and not doing a very good job at it, except you're trying to basically benefit themselves. But now you're proud of the fact that these people are endorsing you. Like, and that's where I think fundamentally where people are absolutely terrified of Donald Trump is because he doesn't care about that. He doesn't care about, you know, getting the lobby job, you know, after he leaves the White House or getting a book deal or something like that. You know, and that has to do with obviously his personal income and wealth, but it also has to do with who he is as a person.
Yeah.
He doesn't care about their narratives. He doesn't care about being invited to their cocktail parties. And I think that's a good thing. And I
think people pick up on that too.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, going back to one of your points earlier when you were talking about, you know, going to the community policing event and trying to convince new immigrants that Americans are that cops in particular are racist. I would challenge anybody to go to any, particularly Southern California, and you know this better than I do, Josiah. Go to any law enforcement agencies, particularly sheriff's departments and city departments in Southern California, and you tell me that somewhere between 40 and in some places as much as 55% of the personnel are Hispanic, Latino, Mexican Americans.
Yeah.
And you saw this during the BLM riots when people were talking about this in Los Angeles and how racist the LAPD was. And it's like 52% of the LAPD is Mexican. And I'm not saying that just because you're Mexican or black or white that you can't be racist. But you can't keep pushing this evil white man trope when it doesn't fit the actual facts. I go back to, you know, and I always tell people my favorite movie in politics is Gangs of New York. You go back and you watch Gangs of New York. It's the history of, you know, American politics in New York City in 1864. And you literally see
brutal,
you know, in the movie, it's obviously stylized and, you know, it's like entertaining, but these Irish are getting off the boat and there is somebody from the Tammany Hall machine who's like, okay, you're going to live in this building. Here's a ticket. You turn this in, you're going to get free potato soup. And oh, by the way, if you have any military age males, they need to stand in that line over there because they're going to be joining the military. And, you know, for 150 years, the Democratic Party had Irish Americans and a lot of Catholic Americans in this lockstep because they were the first ones there when they got off the boat. They were the first ones there that addressed their material needs. And, you know, I think as conservatives and Republicans, our challenge is to look to look past obviously the evildoers and try and find the good apples, and there are lots of them out there, and engage those people. Because if we engage those people, they're going to make the right decisions about the future of America.
Absolutely.
They risk their lives to bring their family here because they believe in the America that you and I believe in. And it's so unfortunate when you have people that are at the highest levels of government and business and industry in the United States that clearly just don't care about that. And like you said, is it somewhere between like malicious intent or just, stupidity? And at some point, it's got to be malicious intent with some of these folks. There's no way you can look at what's going on with the border and somehow say that, oh, yeah, well, it's Trump's fault because he killed the bill. No. You're the president of the United States.
No, and that's what I was referring to. I think when I looked at it from the perspective of like writing an indictment, is I think it is provable. I think it is malicious. I think you could look at the information we got from Hunter's laptop. Think about that, for example, when you talk about intentional. They had 52 senior members of the intelligence community sign a letter, right, about that being fake information and Russia collusion and all of that. It turned out to be an absolute lie. It was a lie. And the mainstream media just kind of like, oh, well, I guess another one, we lost. It was a lie. And that's really, really bad. And I don't know if it was like, maybe 50 of these guys just trusted their friends because they hate Trump so much. And they were just like, sure, I'll write a letter. Who knows? But they knew it wasn't true. And they knew that information before Biden was elected president. And they held on to it. So that is intentional. You colluded. That's where the real collusion is. You kept information from the American people about the Biden family having deep relationships with the Chinese Communist Party. In fact, the Dems in general, right? You have Chinese spy drivers, and you have Swalwell sleeping with a Chinese spy, and
the woman who was I think she was the communications director for the governor of New York.
Yeah,
and the FBI finally had to arrest her because if you go back and you look, and she's literally not only on the Communist Chinese Party's payroll, but she's literally editing speeches to remove any mention of Uyghurs or anything like that. It's amazing. And at some point, you want to look at well-intentioned Democrats who are elected officials and be like, "You're not that stupid." I mean, come on.
No.
And you see it constantly. People are telling conservatives and people on the right, well, that one person who was with you in that picture, I'm pretty sure they're racist. You need to police your own. Okay, yeah, you're right. We don't want any bad actors standing up and speaking for me or my party. But that flows both ways. How about a little bit of accountability for some of the things that you're seeing on their side? And there just seems to be no sense of that, which, again, goes back to my, one of my biggest bugaboos about politics is people's inability to admit that they were wrong.
Yeah, I think that is a dangerous zone that we've entered. And, I'll say it. I don't, a lot of people don't want to be all doom and gloom, but I believe at this point that conflict is inevitable. I'm not saying it's kinetic, but I think that we are headed for civil conflict. And I think it'll start with economical, it'll start with state rights, it'll start with governors saying no to, DC bureaucrats. And I think the debate is a great example of that. We have reached an ideological impasse where the left just fully hates America and they're willing to say so. And it's like, if the Republicans won't step up and fight fire with fire, then we're at a loss. There is no movement forward. The country's ripping apart at the seams, and it can't continue that way because a house divided cannot stand. It reminds me of, I was watching or just wrapping up Ken Burns' documentary on the Civil War, which is fantastic, right? It won a bunch of Emmys when it came out back in the 90s. And there was a quote from Harper's Weekly, which was a editorial that put out weekly stuff during the Civil War. I'm going to read this quote because it just really stood out to me. Harper's Weekly, the summer of 1864, when it looked like the North was pretty much losing, Abraham Lincoln was running for re-election amidst a civil war. And this is what the writer wrote. The political campaign, which ends in the election of the 8th of November, 1864, decides the most important question in history. It has always been the fate of republics to be destroyed by faction. That fear is now about to be confirmed or dissipated forever. Of course, we know that Lincoln was elected. Again, the Republicans led the charge to free the slaves and abolition, and it was all Christian Judaic background behind that did it, and the Democrats continued to be racist like they are today. But I think that we're at that point again. I'm a huge fan of history. I've studied a lot of it globally and, of course, nationally, and I see the signs on the wall. We're a culture at an impasse. And, those that we elect to go represent us are supposed to be doing that. And I don't feel like they really do that anymore. There's a couple here and there. We can talk about good people. But at some point, your brain has to switch to, of course, the practical things are necessary, like practically running the economy, right? But you also have to be aware of big picture of what's going on politically in your country and culturally. And I don't feel like anyone's really stepped up to say, hey, this is really bad. Anyways, I feel like you want to say something about that.
In another lifetime, if I weren't working in politics, I would want to teach probably history at a junior college or something like that. And I'm a big history buff, and I try and avoid the correlations between the Roman Republic and the American Republic, because I think it's not an apples to apples comparison.
Sure.
But there are some points that are really problematic to me as you look at the historical correlation. In 146 BC, the Romans defeated Carthage, finally salted the earth, burned the whole city down. And so they basically had the Western Mediterranean on lockdown. The same year, the city of Corinth in Greece rose up against Roman rule and overthrew their local governor. And then the Romans sent in troops and they burned the whole city to the ground. And so they literally had locked down both ends of the Mediterranean. And so their external focus as an empire that drove them for so long, which was there was a bad guy, whether it was the Carthaginians or it was the Greeks or the Egyptians or whoever, there was always a bad guy. And at some point when they defeated those external threats, all their threats became internal. And then right after that, you had the first Roman Civil War between Marius and Sulla, which eventually led, of course, to Caesar and the death of the Republic. And like I said, it's not an apples to apples comparison, but there is, to me, this lingering fear that with the absence of external enemies, we will continue to find our boogeymen internally. And, I want to be more optimistic about, your reference to civil strife and conflict and things like that. One, I think most Americans are too soft for any conflict of any kind, but that's a whole other conversation.
Yeah.
But it is something we have to continually be aware of, that level of dissolution of basic civility in American politics and this blind eye towards, the future of America is going to at some point cause people to dig in and say, no, enough.
Right.
And there's so many great sayings about this, people that don't have anything worth dying for have nothing worth living for. People that don't stand for anything will fall for anything. And it's, sadly enough, it's all true.
And we've seen the birth pains of that already. I mean, you look at what Abbott did with the border and National Guard. I think he was a little late on that, but we're already seeing this sort of, remember Biden, they played chicken for a second. Biden's like, you're not going to do that. And he went to take a nap and then he did nothing. Right. And you literally had National Guard facing off with the Border Patrol. And what people don't realize is 99% of the Border Patrol don't want to do, they don't like Mayorkas. So there's already the birth pains of this. We see that coming. And that's why I think that this election coming up is so consequential, because America, as our beautiful constitutional republic, we cannot take another Kamala Harris admin. Well, the radical direction that they've taken this country, I don't think that we will survive it peacefully. They're very open now about seeking structural changes to how we are constructed, right?
And that's how you can tell that they're losing, right?
Right.
Whenever they want to change the rules, it's because they're losing.
Right.
And that's, it's a classic example of, well, if I'm losing, it must be because the system is rigged, not because my ideas suck. Right. It's not because I'm wrong. It's because the rules are unfair. And that whether it's stacking the courts or, popular vote or all of these different things that they're trying to grasp for, it's because the way the rules are written, they're not winning. It's because their ideas are bad. It's because the policies are bad. And
you've heard only people on the left have talked about recently. There's been talk of doing away with the First Amendment and the Second Amendment, and they used to be secretly talking about that at their weird commie meetings on college, and now they say it openly. They openly run. You have people that openly run as socialist titles in their names. For office. I mean, those things used to be hidden, and it's just not the case anymore. I don't see where you get past that unless we set a firm line on the ground that says, no, we are not communist. Our republic will not survive as a socialist state. And if that's what you want, make your case, but you're going to have to really fight for it, because you're talking about the deconstruction of the American Constitution, right? It's not compatible with the form of any other government, as the founders made very clear. So we're at this weird impasse. I don't know. I don't pretend to predict the future, but
there's a weird confluence of they say that politics makes strange bedfellows. When you have the top people in Wall Street and American business aligning themselves with the Democratic Party, everyone should be concerned with that. Everyone.
yeah,
Because at some point, the reason why you have so many young people who are willing to buy the lie and the myth that America is structurally unfair for everybody is because at some points it is. Crony capitalism exists in such an incredible extent that they're using that as a way to undermine the entire system in a way that they can get more control for the people at the very top.
yeah,
It is undeniable to look at the way that these things have panned out. When you think about and I don't want to get into COVID and inoculations and all that kind of stuff, but I'm not opposed to anybody making money. But when Pfizer posts a $28 billion profit off the COVID vaccine manufacturer, which, oh, by the way, is pretty much all government mandated and government funded,
yeah.
and nobody's concerned about that.
Yeah, I'd love for the government to mandate you buy my product. That would be wonderful.
Yeah, that's crony capitalism at its finest.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. All right. Well, that's intense. So everyone should go, have a Krispy Kreme donut today and feel better.
Well,
Brandon,
here's a good. No, let's end on something positive.
Yeah.
Let's end on something positive. And as many challenges as our republic has faced over the years, whether it's the American Civil War, whether it's the existential threat of Nazism in World War II and global conflict, whether it's Islamic terrorism and jihadi movements around the globe, America has found a way to prevail. Not always overnight. We don't always, there's that great quote, I think, by Winston Churchill: Americans always will find the right thing to do after they've exhausted every other option. And I think that is true. I think that there's an inherent part of Americans that we want to prevail. And the we aspect is where, we're having problems in defining what the we is and what we looks like. I have hope and faith. As I say this, I spoke to a group of college students the other day, and I told them, I said, I hope you guys are paying attention to politics because we need you to. We need you guys to fix the problems that the boomers and Gen X and everyone else has kind of created, because we're out of ideas. We're going to need you guys to come up with some really great ideas to fix these things and to make these things better. And eventually, I think that these kids who are 18 to 22 that we make so much fun of, that stare at their screens and can't have productive conversations, or maybe don't know what an actual job looks like, eventually, I think they're actually going to be our saviors. These are going to be the kids who have grown up in a world where they can Google everything and they can fact check everything. And their level of distrust for, whatever the narrative is in the media is just as strong as any MAGA Republican who shows up at a Trump rally.
Yeah.
And even though they may not politically identify with a cause, right or left, I think their healthy level of skepticism is going to lead to good results. At least let's hope so.
I agree. I think that's why we do what we do here at Defining Truth, because our namesake, the whole idea was, let's define truth, because we didn't feel like there was enough of that. I didn't feel like the Republicans did it enough. I feel like the left constantly doles out a narrative that they want that generation to believe. And we do see change when truth is available. When you give people a choice, and when the left makes its claims, and then you can counter it. But I don't think there's enough people in this culture war waging that war for truth. It's always the left. It's all that you hear. And you see it at Disney movies and music and award shows, and I mean the list goes on and on and on. The left just dominates the narrative. And for too long, I would say, conservatives have dismissed that as culture war and a waste of time, when in fact I think the left, that's the only thing the left does is culture war, because they properly cued in on something that the Marxists did back in Europe, is that if you control the ideology, you control the person. Right. We could go on and on about dictators that made quotes like that, right? Controlling the generations, academia.
I was very fortunate to actually met Andrew Breitbart when he was still alive. And literally it was like the day before he passed away from a heart attack. And somebody asked him, Andrew, I don't understand, like, why do you live in Los Angeles? Why do you live in Hollywood? Why do you continually engage in the entertainment industry? Why aren't you focused more on campaigns? And his observation was that culture or politics is downwind of culture, and we have to pay attention to the culture. And I think that is easy to get lost on someone like myself, who's, focused on the 2-year political cycle all the time. And a lot of people who are plugged into 24-hour news and things like that. But we have to keep an eye on the culture, like you're saying, and what you're talking about, and defining truth and providing truthful options. That is the culture stuff that's really going to matter. When you can show people the truth and they can find it on their own, they're going to realize that truth and they're going to embrace it stronger than any ideology that may have been preached to them in a college class or on an Instagram account.
100%. I like it. I like it. All right. Well, we're going to wrap it up here pretty soon. It's been great having you on. I enjoy the conversation. I'm sure we could talk for days, really. Brandon,
Probably.
I want you to ask Chris one innocuous, sort of platonic question about his favorite fill in the blank, and let him answer. And then I just want to see your face on here because I haven't seen you yet.
Well, I have a couple things that I want to say. First, I want to thank you for coming on. As you were talking and as I thought about meeting you a few years ago, I think it's been a few years now, you were like the first time, and I don't mean for this to like sound weird, but like when I met you, it was kind of the first time that I saw somebody in politics that kind of acted the way that I did or thought the way that I did kind of about life. Because when I got involved in politics, I was involved for the better part of a decade. It was all of these slick looking dudes in a suit and tie. And then here comes Chris Faulkner, who's just like, yeah, I have tattoos and yeah, I'm a little rough around the edges. And I thought like, finally somebody who like is just them, right? Even in the Republican Party, which I got in young and was kind of glorified by, I was like, learned very quickly, like, this is not what I thought it was. Like, who are the people here who are just like themselves? So anyways, I just thought that was always something that I admired about you. Specifically, something you said one time that I still tell people today, including Josiah, who signs the front of my paychecks. You got to pay me extra to dress up in a suit.
Yeah, I remember you said that too.
And I thought that was just absolutely hilarious because I feel the same way. Like, I'm a Southern California boy. I love to be in flip-flops.
That's it. You're wearing a suit. You're wearing a suit tomorrow.
It doesn't matter if I'm in a suit or if I'm in flip-flops. Yeah, literally. Me too. Right? Like, it doesn't matter whether I'm in a suit or whether
do we all have to do this? Hold on a second.
Uh-oh. He's got the slippers.
Oh, I'm not on camera. Can you show mine?
Oh, here we go.
Slippers. Okay. Just to be clear, we are in California.
So anyways, that was always something that I admired about you. I tried really hard when I first got in politics. I thought I had to hide my tattoos and hide who I was. I'm a military brat as well. My dad is a Marine. Both my younger brothers are Marines. So I always thought that was something that was really cool about you. One thing that I do want you to talk about just real quick, because I saw when you tweeted about it, is your first interaction with Tim Walz, which was not when he was the vice president or the vice president pick for the Democratic Party, and it's not even when he was governor. It was well before that, and I thought that was really interesting for specifically young people in politics. About you never know when you meet somebody, whether it's on the right, the left, the center, you never know who that person is going to be one day. And I just thought that this story was pretty interesting. So tell us about the first time that you met good old Tim.
Sure. Well, first of all, Brandon, I appreciate your kind words, but I would also say that I didn't become comfortable in my own skin and kind of who I am and, how I present myself until probably later in my career. I mean, I definitely had that first 10 to 15 years where I had really, short hair like I have now, but, clean shaven, the blue sport coat with the red tie and all that kind of stuff.
I was a little disappointed. I thought somebody got to you when we first saw you because the hair's a little short, but...
Well, it's falling out because I'm getting old. But, in all seriousness, I understand, the level of, respect, when people talk about, dressing up for different things and how you approach things. But again, I've always seen my job as really kind of more plumbing and less grand strategy. I was a platoon sergeant in the infantry in the Marines, which is the greatest training for politics ever, because it's all about taking a commander's intent and then figuring out how long it's going to take to get from point A to point B. Yeah. How much water do I need? How many dudes do I have? Do I have all the stuff I need? And when do I got to be there by? And so the logistics has always been more interesting to me. But to your point about Governor Walz, so 2004, I was the state director for President Bush's reelection campaign in Minnesota. And we had done already, I think, 9 presidential rallies with President Bush in the state. And we were trying to get outside the Twin Cities. And somebody had this idea about going down to Mankato, which is southern Minnesota. And so we ended up scheduling the event down there. And like all of our events, they were ticketed. Not because we were trying to screen people out as much as because we were trying to identify voters. Because in a state like Minnesota, where you don't have party registration, you had lots of people that would never answer a survey, never ask for a yard sign, but they would show up to a rally. And then we could be like, oh, okay, well, let's tag this person as obviously a Bush supporter. And so we would do tickets, and people would wait in line, and we would, here's your ticket and we'll see you on Saturday. And the ticket distribution for that particular event was out of a real estate office that somebody had volunteered for us down in southern Minnesota. And when we announced the event, the reception was so strong that there were, on the first day of ticket distribution, the line was over 3 hours wait to get to the front to get tickets.
Wow.
And so a lot of excitement. And across the street from our ticket distribution location, there was a couple of protesters that showed up. Nothing big. They weren't like throwing, bottles or anything like that. They were just carrying a couple signs and, letting their opinion be heard, which, as a big First Amendment guy, I'm all for.
That's how it should be.
Yeah, exactly. One of those protesters was the local high school teacher named Tim Walls, and he was holding a sign that basically said, veterans for Carrie Edwards. I'm a Operation Enduring Freedom veteran. Which we can get into the whole stolen valor stuff. I think that's maybe not as substantive a charge. There are plenty of other things to ding Tim Walls on, but he did serve his country for 24 years, and at the risk of sounding like a apologist for him, I think that's not the best line of attack to use on him. Anyway, so 20 years ago, he's standing out there with the sign, he's protesting. And then the next day, and this is where, this is 20 years ago, things got a little muddy for me, but I basically remember having an interaction with him, and somebody had pointed him out to me and said, hey, this guy was protesting yesterday, and now he's in line to get tickets. Should we ask him to leave? And, I was a younger man, maybe not the most mature decision I ever made. And I said, nah, let's let him wait in line. And then when he gets to the front of the line, then I'll throw him out. Because I thought I was being funny. And so we waited. And, he's told the story multiple times now. And I've had people relate the story back to me because I didn't remember all the details. But we know for a fact that he was protesting. And then the very next day, he was trying to get tickets. And then the day of the event, he got tickets through someone else. And because I was the former Marine and I'm bigger than most other people, I was inevitably the guy that always had to ask people to leave. I'm not manhandling people and throwing them out. Secret Service doesn't touch any of the political protest stuff. That's all political staff that has to deal with that. And so I probably asked somewhere between 10 and 15 people to leave at every single different event. All kinds of, people that wanted to protest or people that were, wearing Carrie Edwards shirts and things like it's like, I'm all for your freedom of speech, but this is a private event. And if you're clearly just here to disrupt, then I'm doing this for your own good. You're surrounded by 7,000 Bush supporters. It's not going to end up well for you. But I remember Walls specifically because, and I've seen a lot of veterans do this where they try to intimidate people that are not veterans with the, I'm a veteran, I can get away with whatever I want card. And, he basically, when we told him and we were denying him entry based on the fact that he was protesting, he was like, well, I'm a veteran. I just served my country, guarding the front lines in Italy with a weapon of war and all the other stupid things that he said. And I was like, I don't care. I'm a veteran too. And, that has nothing to do with whether or not, who you're supporting and why you're here. If you're here under false pretenses. And he's like, well, I'm here with my students. These are my students and they have a right to see their president. Both the kids he was with were members of the college Democrats at the local college. Yeah. They weren't his students at the high school. And so as I talked to a number of reporters about the incident, it's not so much that there's a nefarious origin story, but I feel like Tim Walls went into that whole thing. He wanted to have a cool origin story. He wanted to be able to give that speech. And he did in 2006. He basically said he ran for Congress because he was denied, democracy and wasn't allowed to see his president. All this baloney. Yeah. And then when he ran for governor, he said the same thing. And he's since repeated the story multiple times. I know different media outlets have submitted the picture of him protesting and saying, hey, is this Governor Walls? And his office refuses to comment, which basically means, yes, it is him. So, all right.
It sounds like he should give you credit for his origin story, huh?
Everybody wants to be a Greta Thunberg. You know, it's like they all want to be like, I was there trying to bomb the police station with Obama and the Weather Underground, and that's why I should be a senator. I can't stand that.
It goes to this kind of grievance politics, though, right? It wasn't that he got involved in politics because he had a bright vision for America. It was grievance politics. He got involved because he was angry about something, and that happens on both sides. I'm not saying that's exclusive to Tim Walz, but I don't think that's healthy. I don't think that your whole like origin story and basis for being involved is because you felt like you were wronged,
or because you hate your country.
Yeah.
I'm not saying Tim Walz. I'm saying like I think a lot of people are motivated by that now, where it's like they go to school and they learn, well, I should hate America because we're evil, right? Capitalist, racist, on, and then they get involved because you have to stop evil. I mean, Hillary was a masterful at that, at demonizing her opposition, right? What's her famous line? Anybody that doesn't vote for Hillary is deplorable. It's just like, wow, I don't want to be deplorable, so I gotta vote for.
And the villainization of the other side is part of the political process. And one of the things that I comment on frequently when people will tell me, they'll say, well, it's gotten so much more negative than it used to be. The tone is so much more negative. I'm like, do you not like read any history books? Go back and look at the first elections between Adams and Jefferson and Washington. And I mean, the first negative campaign mailings were basically accusing of Adams of being a closet monarchist. And then, of course, accusing Jefferson of having fathered biracial children out of wedlock. I mean, American politics has always been a full contact sport because it matters.
Yeah.
And I'm not one of those people who thinks you should never raise your voice or never get intense about these things, because it matters. You should be excited. You should be intense. You should be passionate about those things. But you can't do it to the extent where you're willing to literally hate the people that may live on the same street as you. You can't do it to the extent in which you're trying to deny other people their basic foundational freedoms, which unfortunately I think is kind of the direction the left is wanting to take us, to the point where they're basically saying, you are clearly not right and you refuse to be right, so we're going to force you to be right.
Right. We're going to, well, it's like what you said. They're going to change the rules because they're unable to do it under the current methods, and because they've been unsuccessful at, like, for example, getting rid of the Second Amendment, or whatever, and they just lost Roe v. Wade. So what they're shifting now to say, well, obviously we need to change America because we're not getting what we want, so we're going to change the rules to force through what we want. I mean, and talk about history. I mean, that's the same? It's the same pattern. I mean, Mao in the 1920s was like, it comes from the barrel of a gun. He knew that, right? I mean, whether it was a physical gun or not, in his case it was. 80 million people died, but the point was force. That's what it represents, right? And it's like, at some point, the left always goes to force.
During the dissolution of the Roman Republic, there's this great scene, which is probably, somewhat embellished by historians, but Pompey Magnus, who at the time was an ally of Julius Caesar, he goes into to the Senate, and this is during the first triumvirate. And they're like, well, you can't do that. You can't raise legions and bring them in the city. You can't do this. You can't do that. And Pompey looks at them and he just says, who are you, men of law, to lecture me while I stand here with my hand upon my sword? And it was a very kind of blunt, like, hey, this is the direction our politics is going. And I have great fear for America. I don't want us to go down that path that, might makes right, or, the ability to, force your will upon others is somehow going to be the right way. Which is why I always encourage people that, especially on the right, because I talk to more people on the right than I do the left, but it really goes for both sides. You cannot win people over to your opinion by constantly, owning the libs, or, telling someone they're morons generally doesn't bring them over to your side of opinion, right?
Yeah.
If we're actually trying to convince people, and I don't want to make too many analogies between religion and politics, but there is a level of compassion and there's a level of outreach that Christ showed us in the way his approach was for the sinners and the taxpayers, right? Yes, he flipped the tables with the money changers in the temple. I'm familiar with that story too. But for every one of those, there's like 10 other stories where he was like, you know what? No, I'm going to go meet them where they're at and give them the truth and let them make their own decision. And I hope that's more of the direction we can see in American politics. It's people being exposed to the truth, like what you guys are doing with this show, and being able to make their own decision about what's best for themselves and for their communities.
Well, you're 100% right. We talk about that often. I mean, that's right out of 1 Corinthians chapter 13, which talks about you can have all of these special gifts and abilities, but if you don't have love, you're just a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal. In other words, you're just an irritating noise. So it's not accomplishing anything, even if you are right. And unfortunately, we suffer from that on the extremist side of both aisles, where it's just like noise and clanging cymbals. And it's like, what are you trying to accomplish here? Very interesting. Okay, Brandon, back to the Platonic question for Chris.
Yeah, I don't have one. I mean,
I'll give you an example. What is your favorite car?
Go for it.
My favorite car?
If you could have a car to drive, like a dream car, what would it be?
I feel like I'm driving my dream car.
I knew you were going to say that.
I have a Ram 1500
Okay.
quad cab. All three of my dogs fit in the back. My wife's in the front with me, and
Perfect.
it's got. I mean, I feel like and I'm 6'4". I'm somewhere a little south, 300 pounds. I tend not to like small cars, and so yeah, I love my truck.
Let's get that down to 250 and get in the gym. We'll do it together.
Okay, all right. Here's one.
Like 280. I'm trying to get there.
All right.
Favorite non-political, non-historical movie?
Well, why does it have to be non-historical? It could just be non.
Because he's like a history buff and he works in politics, so something outside of like what he does every day.
It's actually a. Does a documentary count?
Sure. As long as it's not about politics, sir.
I really love Ancient Apocalypse, Graham Hancock on Netflix.
Okay.
He is a journalist that explores interesting questions about.
Is that the guy with the wild hair that shows up and talks about aliens all the time?
That's Giorgio Tsoukalos.
Oh, okay.
So
okay.
There's Ancient Aliens, which is like a gateway drug for people that want to question science.
Okay. Yeah.
But if you get past all that crap and you get in a little deeper and you substantive questions, I think you get to where Graham Hancock is. And he asks really interesting questions about, maybe things are older than we think they are. Whether it's societal or technology.
Oh, I've seen this. It's really interesting.
It's Apocalypse on Netflix. It's really, really good. Okay. And you don't have to agree with all his conclusions or some of his theories, but he asks interesting questions, which is one of my, I enjoy that. I like it when someone asks interesting questions that may not jive with whatever the mainstream, narrative it is. And he's willing to question the kind of conventional wisdom about archaeology and world history.
I like it.
Okay, last one, because we're approaching 2 hours and we're 60 days out, less than 60 days out from an election. So I know you're a busy guy.
2 hours.
All right. You're not working in politics. You're not doing like Scottish rain dances in your off time. What would you be doing?
Oh, that's easy. I would be the strength and conditioning coach
for your high school team. Yeah, you told us that before.
Yeah. I mean,
you'd be like Friday Night Lights, huh?
Yeah, but I don't want to be like one of the coaches. That'll be one of my sons. Honestly, I got a 24-year-old and a 21-year-old that both want to coach like high school football. And if I could just be the water boy or the get back coach or the guy that helps the kids with their push-ups and stuff, to me, that would be one of the most rewarding things. I've gotten to coach a little bit in my volunteer time. And it's funny, when you work in politics, you think you're doing something like super important. You're working with important people about important issues. And not to diminish, because those things are important. But so many of the end effects or the net positive or net negatives that happen are further down the line. Where when you're like coaching kids in a sport, you can see it in the course of a month or a week or a season. You can see that growth as a human being. And culturally, I feel like, in the short term, that's far more important than any of the stuff I've ever done in politics.
Awesome.
Okay. Okay. I was going to say pie or cake, but I think it's time to wrap up the show.
Why would you limit yourself? That's a ridiculous question.
All right. Well, now that I know that about your desires to be, a strengthening coach and all that, we'll have a position for you as division PT instructor when the Civil War kicks off. So you'll be up there training people. All right. Chris, thanks again for coming on. It's been great. We got a lot here in the next 60 days. I'm sure you're going to be really busy, so it'll be really interesting to see. Hang with us real quick while we wrap this, and then we'll wrap it up. So everybody listening, thanks for tuning in again to Defining Truth. This is episode 41. Share it if you're listening. Follow us on YouTube to stay up to date, get emails. Check out definingtruth.org, definingtruth.org. And you can stay connected there with stuff going on and get alerts when we come out with new shows and podcasts. Follow us on Instagram, obviously, and Real Life Network, now available on there. Give them a follow. You can download the app. It's super cool. And if you do get a chance to head over to definingtruth.org, check out our book, self-titled Defining Truth, Articulating America's Worldview. It's a historical look at where we came from ideologically in this country and why we fight for what we fight for now as conservatives and Christians. Defining Truth, Articulating America's Worldview. We'll see you next time.